Hi, my name's Phil Craig. I'm a writer, a TV producer, a lover of stories, and a connoisseur of scandal. And I'm on a mission to bring you the most scandalous tales ever told. So thanks for joining me here at the Scandal Mongers podcast. And so this is Christmas. And what have we done? Well, we've done a lot, haven't we? What a year. Welcome. Welcome to my little Christmas special. Thank you for joining me. I don't know where this is going. I don't even know where this is going up. I think maybe Christmas Eve or maybe Christmas Day or maybe Boxing Day. There's been a bit of a breakdown in communications between me and producer Theo. He's fallen off the radar. Where is he? Maybe he is up at the North Pole helping Santa, producing some of the presents. I don't know. Anyway, it'll be going out to you, this program, around Christmas. And if you found it, whatever you are in the world, whether you're in my hemisphere where it's really getting quite cold and frosty, or enjoying lovely days on the beach in Australia, or wherever you are, happy Christmas. And thank you once again for joining me here at the Australian Bar. This is all lit up. There's a tree somewhere in the corner. Yep, it's all very festive here. We've had, what a few days. It's lovely. I'm recording this, 20th. We've had my granddaughter's school Christmas concert, which was amazing, very moving. She's 5, and she's very proud of herself, and she sang really, really well. And yeah, those things are always wonderful, aren't they? Except the one difference is when our kids were her age, not everybody had a camera phone. In fact, nobody had a camera phone. We're talking, God, a long time ago now, 30 odd years. So yeah, now everybody stands up in front of you and starts videoing their lovely children, and it's nice for a while, then it gets annoying. But anyway, I mustn't become the Grinch, or indeed, yeah, I mustn't become the Grinch. It was lovely. And of course, people want to video their children. Shut up, Phil. Get me in the programme. Lots of people coming. We've got all my 3 kids will be here at different times, all our 4 grandchildren, my sister and her family. Yeah, very happy time. And actually, the really lovely thing, for those who've been with me all year, you'll remember that a year ago, we were having a very difficult Christmas because we'd just come back from Madeira, where we had our sort of annual holiday with my mother-in-law, Jennifer. There's around the corner, a big part of our life. She had this fall, fractured pelvis. She came back. It was difficult. It was, planes and wheelchairs and painkillers, and she couldn't really get out of bed. So we took Christmas to her, which is lovely in its own way. We sort of had Christmas Eve on a tray, and then on Christmas Day, we managed to get her into a chair in the bedroom. You couldn't navigate the stairs. So we sort of brought the food round from our house to hers on trays and in bowls and in pots. And we had a lovely Christmas, and some of the kids and the grandkids came, and we stood round and we said the little Christmas. She wasn't able to go to church. So we said a few prayers, sang a few carols, and did a little extract from a Christmas carol. So it was lovely in its own way, but it was, at the time, we were all a bit worried whether she'd bounce back, 86. This is a bad time to fracture your pelvis. But she's been amazing. She's now, I would say, 99%. She's probably not quite as mobile as she was, but she's rattling around. I often look up, even recording these, see through the window, she's whizzing off down the road to the post office. Yes, so she's a lot better. And 2 nights ago, on the exact anniversary of when we got back from Madeira, the amazing Frances, Mrs. Craig, and me, but mostly her, produced an evening of Madeiran treats. Look, you even had the little flags here. Frances made little Madeira flags. Lovely. And we sat around and we had the same food and the same cocktails that we had at our favourite hotel. And it was a surprise for her, and she was really touched. And that all got us in the Christmas spirit. Now, can I share my screen? And I don't know, whenever I try to do this, it usually means I waste like a lot of time. Hang on a minute. Patience. Uh-huh. Now we're getting somewhere. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, that was in yonks ago. Yes, here we are. Just a few photos. Yes, allow. There's Francis, and that's the bolo de mil, Portuguese Madeiran speciality cake, which we had. There's Jennifer looking very happy. 2 bottles of Madeira with the cake. There was more than just cake. Lovely fish, that we, typical of the fish we used to have there, and a club sandwich, which is, for some reason, we associate with the hotel that we stayed in, because they did lovely club sandwiches. We'd have them by the pool most lunchtimes. There they are, the girls, Frances and her mum. She is. Quick flash of my grandson. Yes, garlic bread. Amazing Madeiran garlic bread. Now, garlic bread, if people are very snobbish about garlic bread. If you go to a kind of low-rent restaurant and have garlic bread, people think it's a bit down market, don't they? But actually, if you give it a fancy foreign name, there's nothing like it. And believe me, the Portuguese garlic bread is to die for. So that's what we had. So anyway, I thought I'd show some pictures of our lovely festive evening, Madeira themed, and welcome you to the show. Sorry, I haven't even told you what's in it, but you probably know the big surprise is Andrew's back. Yes, Andrew is back. This is it the podcast's third or fourth Christmas? We've been going just over 3 years, and Andrew has agreed to come back for a little chat about his year, which has been extraordinary. I mean, he's written a book and published a book which has changed the conversation about Prince Andrew and has been a bestseller, but it's also had a lot of issues. He's had a few struggles with it, which I'm sure he'll talk about, but it'd be good to check up on him. And he's promised to say a few things about his next project, which is about the Queen and Prince Philip's marriage. Yeah, Andrew is going to go there. Whether he should or not, I'll leave it for you to decide. I mean, biographers do. If you want to understand somebody, you need to know about their relationships. I mean, if you're writing a book about anybody, that would be accepted. And why not Prince Philip? Because, the rumours, the stories, what's the truth about their supposed understanding. And actually, when it comes down to it, maybe for certain kind of relationships, those things are maybe inevitable. I don't know. They were certainly time-honoured in that and other royal and aristocratic families. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. In fact, I'm saying it's probably wrong for most of us, and probably wrong for them. But that's how they chose to live. If it's true, and that's how we ask Andrew about that. So a bit of a scandalous chat with old friend Andrew, and then sort of extending the program into, I don't know, it's going to be like an hour and a half or more. One of the lovely things about this year, I published a book. Did I mention my book? And I got to talk about the book in lots of lovely places. Chalk Valley Literary Festival, that was a highlight. HMS Belfast, the Imperial War Museum, and of course Australia. Had an amazing time, met several of you. So grateful to everybody who came out to see me. Spoke in Canberra, in Sydney, in Melbourne, Perth. It was wonderful. Wonderful. And so that was good. But the other lovely thing was, I sort of feel I'm part of a new community. When I worked in television, that's very social. You're always working in big teams and you travel together. There's film crews, and it's part of the fun of telly, which I slightly miss. Also, the fact that I've got to go to lots of conferences in nice places, I also miss that. Markets like MIPCOM twice a year in Cannes. Oh, it was hard. It was hard sitting on the beach drinking champagne, talking about ideas. But yeah, so I missed that. But I've got a new community, really. I mean, partly through this podcast, partly through going to a few literary events, other writers, other podcasters. And I was really thrilled to be invited by History Rage, one of my favourite podcasts. I've been on it twice. History Rage, to their first festival of podcasters at the War Museum in London. And they asked me to do a little, I took part in a Rage Off, which I think wasn't filmed, where you had to, and swearing was very much encouraged. You had to take on iconic figures and try and bring them down. And I told you how I got Lord Nelson. Who else have I got? Montgomery. Mostly military figures. Yeah. So that was fun. But I also got to interview, name escapes me, Sonia Purnell. Lovely Sonia, who had written this exceptional book about Pamela Churchill, Pamela Harriman as she became, and really dug into the often scandalous, really very interesting and very important life that she led as a high society figure in Britain, very close to Churchill during the war. Her numerous love affairs with very important people. Many of them were Americans. These love affairs were tactically and strategically significant and encouraged, even though she was cheating on Churchill's own son, who was a waste of space himself, frankly. It's amazing that she ever married him. We'll explain why she married him in the conversation that we had. So that was filmed. It's not beautifully shot and it's not done by me on Zoom, but a mate shot it from the audience, and the sound's good. And I thought the conversation was really interesting. And I think maybe some people have got time to kill time on their hands this time of year. And it's such an interesting subject. I thought I'd attach that to this. So that's what's going to happen in this long Christmas festive special. In a minute, we'll talk to Andrew. Then I'll come back, say a few more words. Then we'll have the conversation with Sonia about Pamela. And I'll come back and end the show. I don't know, by then it'll probably be the new year, because I do tend to ramble on. But before all that, thank you again for watching, all your support this year. It's been amazing. I really feel that there's a little community building around this podcast, and it's just about breaking even now. It didn't used to. So I'm definitely going to press on and continue. This thing of once every fortnight, I know some of you have asked for more, but I think one of the reasons it is costing me a little less money is I do fewer shows, and I pick them a bit more carefully, perhaps, in terms of what people actually might be interested in. That's helped. But most of all, what's helped is you guys. So happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, happy holidays, whatever your faiths, whatever your beliefs. Hope you're having a wonderful time, and I will see you soon. But let's check in on Andrew, see how he is getting on this time of year. Okay, bye. Hey, Andrew, how you doing?
I'm very good, thanks. You're looking very Christmassy there.
Well, it's the season. Look, the house, the bar.
Yes, gosh,
Tree.
it is. Amazing. I'm sorry, nothing has changed here. It's the same. You'll see.
Well, that's because I'm lucky to get you, because you've had the most ridiculously busy year. And you're the hardest working man in show business. Let's be honest.
Well, it has been busy. I've literally just had a meeting, and I'm going to another one at 12. So, yeah, it's literally since August, it hasn't stopped. I think on one day I was thinking I can have a drink now, and at 7 o'clock the King made his announcement about Andrew being stripped of his titles, and off I went again until 2 a.m. So, wow. Yes. But anyway, it's very nice to be back.
You must be, it's the season to feel a little bit sentimental and look back on the year. You must be feeling rather pleased with yourself at some level.
Well, it's always exciting, if a book, does well and has some impact. And, we've shifted, I think it's shifted the dial a little bit, helped with lots of other factors. So that's exciting. Yeah. And it certainly put me in a slightly different position, in terms of my books. So, disappointing in the States, I had problems. The book got cancelled there at the last minute by Simon & Schuster, and I had to self-publish, and that was a bit of a disaster. But I was
going to ask you about that, because when we talked about the book, all I wanted to talk about was what was in the book. But the story behind it is also really intriguing. Did you have any warning they were going to pull the plug? Or was it completely a surprise to you?
Complete surprise. The book was sold to them on a finished manuscript in February. It was slightly long. I think it was 140,000 words. They wanted it cut, but they were happy to go along with the copy editing with Collins, who took some stuff out for legal reasons and then tightened it up a bit. And I just assumed that they were going to go ahead with the Collins edition. But I think they were trying to get, they'd always been sold on the basis it would come out in August in both countries. August, for me, is a good month. It's just ahead of the Christmas rush with all the big books. Some publishers don't like it because they feel everyone's away on holiday and the press are away. But actually, the press is there and people are around. And Collins had no problem with it. Simon Schuster advertised it on Amazon as an August book. And then clearly something changed in a matter of weeks. I was actually away for the weekend in Berlin, and they literally just wrote this. I'd sent them the cut down version, which I had done, which was being copy edited by Collins, thinking that would just keep them sweet. And if there was anything else they needed, I could do that. They wanted an introduction, for example, which I'd written. They wanted more on Epstein. What they wanted cut, both Collins and Simon Schuster, with some of the stuff on Fergie. So they were basically singing from the same song sheet. And I thought they would just go ahead with Collins. They could easily have offset from Collins and got the book out in August. And then the book got cancelled, and they didn't even go through their own termination process, which should have allowed me 90 days to rectify whatever they thought was wrong with it. So, I was scrabbling, no publisher, and I turned down other major publishers in the States for them. So I couldn't get anyone else at that short notice, and it had to come out at the same time. So yeah, there are a lot of stories behind the scenes, a lot of pressure being put on, a lot of interviews that were have done and then never run, trolling, people accusing me of being a paedophile myself, a lot of really negative publicity.
Well, I'm
So
very,
in
I mean,
all I am is a
I'm really
biographer
sorry to
writing.
hear. I mean, did you try and argue the toss? Do you have any rights of redress? I mean, they'd missed out on a bestseller now. I mean, do you get
Well,
a chance to go back to them and say, "Look, guys, you're wrong. It's been printed without an issue all around the world. You know,
well,
have another look at it."
yeah, well, I have done that. Because we made the point that the book that I delivered to them originally, and the book that was published was only 1% different, so it can't have been that bad, and that was much of that was just legal stuff taken out. We did go back to them, and they were prepared to publish it, but I think it was just too late. If the book had come out even in November, after Virginia Giuffre, I think it would have been a bit of a damp squib. So I was proved by my instinct to go out early was right. But yeah, I think they would publish it and honor the contract. But I felt that I'd been damaged. My reputation had been damaged. I was no longer with a major publisher. I'd not had access to bookshops. I hadn't got any of the marketing spend. So a book that the book went to number one here and was in the bestsellers for top 10 for 6 weeks. And it was 10,000th in the States. It would have been a bestseller in the States. So I lost a lot of money. So as you probably know, I'm suing Simon & Schuster for $500,000, which I think is quite modest. And
Actually, I didn't
we'll
know
see.
that. I didn't know that, and good luck to you.
So it is a bit of a David and Goliath, and I'm sure they'll throw everything at me. But I know that I'm not the only author who's had this experience with gallery books. And so I'm hoping other authors will feel emboldened to come forward and say, look, we've got to make a stand. You can't just cavalierly cancel books when you have a contract. This is a bit of a fight back. So yeah, there's been a lot going on behind the scenes. I've done a lot of television for particularly France, Spain, and Italy, and yet we haven't got deals there, which again, perhaps is because people are interested in the subject to read in newspapers, but not necessarily to read books. I mean, there's much more tradition of royal books in this country, I think, than elsewhere. So yeah, it's been a lot behind the scenes. Clearly, there's enough room for 2 chapters for an update in the paperback in the summer, in the light of what's been happening.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because for your paperback, there must be a load of things that you perhaps couldn't publish before or didn't even know about before that you can now include, maybe largely because of the Virginia Giuffre book.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of stuff. I had stuff on Peter Mandelson that was taken out by the lawyers, which can clearly go back in now. I think also some of my sources were distrusted by the publishers and have now been proved to be correct. So they're more trusting of those. But the problem is I only have 8,000 words to do the update. So it's I'm going to have to be quite careful what I put in, because clearly I've got 150 pages of notes from people who've contacted me. Even last night at 3 a.m, I was talking to a woman in Nashville in the States who had experience, and I'm again was talking to someone in Southsea who had stories. So it's amazing the amount of stuff that comes through. I've just come out of a meeting with someone who served with him in the Navy, who had some pretty hair-raising stories about his behaviour, and Sarah Ferguson's as well.
Golly, I mean, all of this new material that's flooding in that you're going to have to somehow boil down into 8,000 words. Has it changed at all your views of them since the book was published? Has it softened them, hardened them, made them sophisticated in some way?
Pardon my views. I thought that I would have people saying, "Look, you've been very unfair, and they're lovely to children, and this has been a hatchet job." But in fact, all the comments that have come in have been, "You only tip of the iceberg, and actually, it's far worse than you think." So, for example, one of the people I was talking to last night has stories about what he's been doing at Pitch Palace and how he's being paid in Bahrain, for example, his links with sex trafficking rings and Russian intelligence services. I mean, some pretty bad stuff. Yeah. I think it's only going to get worse for him, I'm afraid, next year as more of the stuff comes out, both sexual and financial misdemeanors.
Well, I was talking to our mutual friend Shauna and our other mutual friend Di Davis a few weeks ago. And Di, as you know, still can't believe that he's never had the knock on the door from the fraud squad. I mean, do you think while he hunkers down next year in Sandringham, one day that might actually finally happen?
Yes, I think it should. I mean, I think there's certainly grounds for charges to be brought. I mean, I'm amazed that the misconduct in public office didn't stick. I mean, they're sort of hiding behind the sex trafficking in Virginia Giuffre, but I mean, I think trying to influence a police officer in the course of their duties is a crime, and Di Davis, of all people, will know. And I mean, there are many influential people who say that he should be charged. So yeah, I think he's going to run out of road. And I mean, he's still being protected. I think the shocking thing is it's all window dressing this. The idea that he's vacating a Royal Lodge voluntarily without some huge payoff and is ridiculous. I mean, he's also going to a pretty nice house. And it looks like the king has actually facilitated him avoiding justice by doing some deal with Bahrain to sprint him up there if things get a bit hot here. So I'm not convinced that, in spite of what the royal family claim they're doing, that they really have seen how important this issue is and the strength of public opinion, because that's not going to be satisfied by the Met just saying nothing to see here, mate.
God, I mean, what a thought. If the police finally get involved in the fraud squad and they find out what asking questions about the backhanders and all the commissions, he would be somehow helped by the king to go to Bahrain. Oh my God, that would change things.
Yes, well, exactly. I think they're playing a very dangerous game at the moment. They've got away with it so far, and they think maybe they will be able to. I mean, Paul Page, who has been very vociferous, who was one of the protection officers, one of the police officers on the North Gate, and has talked about prostitutes being brought into Buckingham Palace and a free pass being given to Ghislaine, who kind of treated Buckingham Palace as her own office, and that's been verified by other people I've talked to. I mean, he's under a lot of pressure at the moment from the Met for speaking out, and that's what they do. They put pressure on you through your pension, or you just get the knock on the door. I'm waiting for the knock on the door and my computer to be seized, and everything to be taken away. I'm sure that will come.
Actually, it's funny. I sort of thought this conversation might be, end of the year, bit of a slap on the back, big bestseller. It must feel lovely to be Andrew Lownie right now. But actually, you're still right in the trenches, aren't you, mate?
Yes, I think so. I don't think it's going to get any easier. I mean, if they were going to cart me off somewhere, they should have done that months ago. But I think it's still not too late for them to find something. I had an author the other day who was writing a book on the Guildford Four, and he was raided by the police, who claimed to find kiddie porn on his computer, and the Guildford Four book was seized. And when he actually the whole thing went to court, he was able to produce forensic experts to show that this material had been downloaded externally. He hadn't accessed it himself, and it had been planted on him. And that's the sort of thing I think is going to happen. Anything to undermine my credibility and the credibility of the book, which is why I'm so careful to verify everything. There's always a danger that you'll be fed false information to kind of create something that's not true, and then they can say this guy makes stuff up.
Yes, well, that's exactly what Fayed tried to do, didn't he, with our friend David? Trying to kind of send somebody to him with a bunch of lies and then get the police to investigate him. Yes,
Yep.
so you're fishing in some very dark and sinister waters there, mate. I mean, there's people who don't know, by the way, Andrew isn't just a writer. Andrew is a major agent. And one of the other really big books that moved the dial this year was Dianorama. Andy Webb's amazing book about the Bashir panorama, which I've been talking about for weeks now. And I don't think I knew Andrew, or maybe you told me and I just I'd forgotten. When I turned up at the launch party for Andy's book, one of my favorite activities, I have to say, going to a book launch, there's Andrew as the agent. I just think, how do you possibly find the time to do all these things?
Well, it is. That's why I was up at 3 o'clock last night. It is getting tricky to balance everything. Yeah.
But you still have your boyish good looks. That's the main thing. Okay, so moving on, I want to talk just a little bit about your next project. And I'm going to try and entice you to give us some kind of hints about where you're going with Philip, because nobody has ever really gone there, by which I mean the bedroom and his life and his affairs. We saw all the hints in The Crown, but nobody's done a really seriously, properly researched biography that took on the intimate details of the royal marriage. Is that the book? Is that the book that you want to write?
Well, I've got several books I want to write. I mean, I'd like to do a full-scale book, another book on Andrew and Sarah in the light of all the information called Untitled, uh, uh, because I think the two chapters aren't going to be enough. I'd like to. I'm looking at the death of Diana, which we've explored, and I think we both felt was just a tragic accident. But actually, I've been looking at some other information, which makes me think there was a bit of a cover up there. So that's one possibility. And I'm also looking at a book on the Russian royal family and their deaths in 1918 and all the attempts to rescue them. But yeah, Philip, I have done some work on. I mean, I don't want it to be seen as a hatchet job. I have a great deal of admiration for him. But you're right, there's never been a full-scale biography, particularly one using documents. There are still people around who served with him. But no one has done, as I say, what I like to do, the private and the public life by looking at someone through the prism of their marriage. And there is a lot of stuff appearing about the marriage. I mean, the problem is, a lot of people are saying, well, I won't talk to you. We don't want any more of this salacious gossip stuff. Leave the poor man alone. He's dead. But, I think it is, you can't write a biography unless you do consider these things. It has to be done in context and balance. But, as you say, everyone has turned a blind eye to his behavior. And it doesn't undermine what a great consort he was to the Queen, how loyal he was and how effective he was in changing perceptions of the monarchy and taking it into the 20th century. But, that is part of his life and her life. And I don't think you can
Absolutely. I mean, would you write a biography of Beethoven and not mention his romantic and sexual life? Would you write a biography of anybody without wanting to understand them in full? And how can you unless you know about? Because it also tells you about the times they lived in. I mean, you could argue that his relationship with the Queen was a classic and very successful example of a sort of understanding in a marriage between powerful people. That they would
exactly, and very
he would
common.
look the other way, maybe, and occasionally perhaps he looked the other way. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's true in both cases. Absolutely. I mean, it was a happy marriage and a successful marriage, and maybe it's a model for us all. Who knows? But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think things are changing. What I've noticed in the last few months is the press are much more emboldened in the reporting of the royals. The Parliament is more prepared now to ask questions, which wasn't allowed under Erskine May. And even the royal correspondents, who've always been pretty sycophantic, seem more prepared to question things. I mean, we've now got wider questions about royal privilege and accountability. And I think one of the ironies here is that Andrew may have saved the monarchy by his behavior because he's forced them to modernize. I mean, I think it'll be a slow process, but, we may now get, for example, royal wills unsealed, the FOI exemptions removed, and maybe this royal register. All these things, for those who've got nothing to worry about, they should welcome it. I think what's worrying is that both Beatrice and Eugenie have refused to have any sort of audit of their business activities, which was what was worrying other members of the royal family. The feeling was, they shouldn't be blamed for the sins of their parents. But if they are to be kept within the fold, then we have to be sure they're squeaky clean. And if they're not prepared to show they're squeaky clean, then that does raise various questions about what they may have been up to. So, I mean, my own feeling is the stables need to be cleared out in this reign so that William comes with a clean slate. And these things don't hang over him in the way that they've hung over Charles. I mean, the Queen, again, I suppose the most shocking thing of the book was how the Queen allowed this behavior to take place, in fact, turned a blind eye and aided it. This is about the institution of the monarchy supporting financial corruption by senior royals. And I mean, that's the story that I think...
Well, you've always said, haven't you, and we've talked about this a lot, you've always said that you are a monarchist, but you are very tough on the rogue royals. But it just turned out that the Queen was just so she turned a blind eye, and she didn't want to listen when people said the Foreign Office are complaining and there are all these allegations and what's going on these trips. So in a sense, you're right. She did enable a rogue royal herself.
Yeah, and I mean, the diplomats who saw what he was up to as a trade envoy and actually arranged meetings for him or for David or Jonathan Rowland or possibly even Jeffrey Epstein to meet people, nothing to do with promoting British trade. The civil servants who allowed him to mount huge expenses as trade envoy. And I had a meeting with someone, a whistleblower there, who said that he tried very hard to expose what Andrew was up to and was told basically, everything should be allowed because the Queen says so. And even the heads of the DTI and the Foreign Office were turning a blind eye to this stuff. And I'm told that, things were not recorded, so they couldn't be found. Files have been destroyed. And so, this is not just Andrew operating on his own. He's been enabled by a huge body of people who continue to allow him to behave like this. I mean, he had a police escort to the Duchess of Kent's funeral, for example. Well, someone must have arranged that. And for someone who is a non-working royal, it seems very strange. So it's I think this it's got a long way to go in terms of opening up the story, but they've kind of brought the problem on themselves. If they dealt with Andrew 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, then they wouldn't be answering these calls now for more scrutiny, particularly on their finances.
Well, it's over 20 years since I wrote a royal biography, but I do remember something. You can get help from, the royal family, various houses. Princes in those days, of course, there was Clarence House and Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace. Have you had? You don't need to tell me any details, of course, but did you get any feedback from any factions inside the family about your book? Just a little, oh, that was well done, Andrew, or you were right about that, or has it just been nothing?
Well, publicly, the line is they wouldn't comment. But funnily enough, I did talk to a senior official in Whitehall who said that they had scrutinized the book when it first came out, check if there were any grounds for suing, which they weren't able to do, and then saying that actually many people were secretly pleased by the book. So whether that's in the palace, in the royal family, or in government, I don't know, but maybe a mixture of the three. So on one hand, I'm having pressure put on me and people are trying to troll me and discredit me. And on the other hand, people seem secretly pleased. I had hoped that someone might emerge and say, gosh, here, I can give you many more stories. And particularly if Andrew and Sarah are, as we read, threatening to spill the beans on the royal family, people might have given them a warning shot by giving me material to fire against them. So it may come. I mean, I did have an interesting conversation at the Petworth Literary Festival. Someone had asked me in the audience if I believe that Andrew was Porchester's son. And I said, I don't know. I mean, people have said that to me, but I have no evidence. And then as I was walking out, a man came up to me and said, he is Porchester's son. And I said, well, how do you know? He said, I won't tell you my name, but I was a member of the royal household. Now, whether that's disinformation or
okay,
what,
for people who don't know, we talked about maybe the Queen and Prince Philip having an understanding that he would stray a lot. She perhaps had the right to stray if she chose to, and it's long being alleged that she did. She was very close to this guy, Lord Porchester, through their shared love of horses. And there's long been a suggestion that Andrew, who does look a bit different to the others, and certainly behaves in a unique way, and was always her special favourite, wasn't Philip's son. So that's the background to what you just said.
Yes, sorry. So that's interesting. And, and people I have talked to for the Philip book, one of Philip's mistresses I talked to, felt that was, she didn't know, but she said certainly the Queen had an affair with Porchester. I mean, I think when they were off in Kentucky once. So, I think the thing is, we think we know the story of the royal family, but we don't. And I think that's probably true again, in your own researches. We feel we know the story of the Second World War, but there's still new stuff coming out, new records emerging, and new narratives. And I think that there's, of course, everyone kind of adjusts. Each generation has different interests, different things emerge. But it shows you that our history is not as clear cut as we think it is.
Very, very true. Well, look, thank you for this. You're in very pugnacious form. You're working all hours. You're obviously not going to have a very restful Christmas, but I do thank you for what you did with this book, and also what you've done with Diana book, and so much. You've played a big part in the public life of this nation this year, Andrew.
Oh, well, that's thank you. Well, I'm so pleased
On
your
behalf
book.
of the nation, I like to think I speak for Britain. Good on you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, I think if it encourages other people to come forward, then that's good, because in some ways, there's some things I've been talking about for a decade were in the wilderness a bit, and now more people are talking about them and how important it is that there is more transparency. And this is not true of the royal family alone, but everything in terms of public life.
Well, I hope you have at least half an hour to enjoy a small glass of port or something like that, and pat yourself on the back on Christmas Day. Thank you for joining me, my friend, and I'll see you.
Pleasure. Always. See you next year. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to this long Christmas special. Well, Andrew's a bit more serious than I expected. I thought checking in on him at Christmas, he'd be enjoying the remarkable success he's had, but it's obviously been a challenge too. And it's got under his skin. And he's a fighter, is our Andrew, as he showed up in his long struggle over his work on Mountbatten to get access to papers, which is still not resolved. So yeah, that's actually really interesting conversation. And then, of course, I didn't expect him to start talking about who Andrew's father might be. This is another rumour. I don't know what progress he might make in his book, whether there's any real evidence. If there is, it's significant. I mean, I think it might explain a lot. It might explain a lot about how the Queen overindulged this particular special boy of hers. Maybe, who knows? Anyway, very interesting. I'm sure Andrew will do an amazing job. I don't think that book will come out in a hurry, because he's clearly still battling on various fronts over Andrew and Fergie, and I suspect the paperback brings out next year will make a lot more headlines. So no, he was annoyed having to cut out some material. The political stuff about, may say, Peter Mandelson in Britain, for example, that could be very, that'll be headline grabbing here. But I'm sure there'll be more, so that'll happen. Then he'll get stuck in to his work on the Queen and Prince Philip's marriage. Interesting stuff for those who are fond of scandals, and just also really good biographies of important people. So there we are. Now what? Oh, well, have a little rest, maybe. Pause me. This is going to be a long haul. Pause the show. Go and make yourself another cup of tea. Pour yourself another glass of festive fizz or whatever it is you're enjoying. We always like to get the Madeira out. I mentioned Madeira already once. What else do we have in the cupboard? Oh, for Christmas we bought some special whiskies, some nice malt whiskies. Oh, always goes down well this time of the year. Oh, and the damson gin. Yes, and they had lots of damsons this summer in the garden back there. And we sort of turned them into damson gin and damson vodka. We made damsontinis. It's a very lovely sort of colour, very festive colour, and a rather beautiful drink too. So yeah, lots of drinking going on here. If you're having some, then have a pause, have a mince pie, have a moment, and then we'll press on with Sonia Purnell. Yeah, talking about Churchill. I think I've already introduced it properly, really, earlier in the show. But this is one of my favourite biographies of recent years. Really well written, actually. Not every book I cover on this show, they're all interesting, but they're not always easy reads. This one is a very easy read. And what a life. And it's not just the wartime stuff that I alluded to at the beginning. She went on to be a very important figure in American public life. She was involved with powerful families and figures in the Democratic Party, various Kennedys, and she was very early on to Bill Clinton. She saw something in Clinton very early in his career, and she helped introduce him to people and put him in places where he could utilize his charm and his flair for oratory and just charisma, and work his way up until he became president. And her reward for that, of course, was a big job, famously big job. This is a woman who had virtually no qualifications. She left school very young. The sort of education she'd had was really just kind of like needlework and how to get a husband. That was the sort of world she was brought up in. But she ends up as America's ambassador to France, living in this extraordinary place in Paris, hosting great diplomatic soirees and getting involved in all sorts of intrigues. A really important moment towards the end of the Cold War, the troubles in the Balkans, and she was right in the middle of things. You'll find all that out in this conversation with Sonia and I. Like I say, it was filmed slightly from a distance in a slightly echoey room, but I think the sound's good enough, and I think there's things in this conversation that you'll really enjoy. I should say I did this just after I got back from Australia. And if you see me, I'm a lot better now with my back. And I'm not better perfectly, but it is definitely improving. But at the time this was shot, you might have seen me doing a bit of this because it was actually, I was probably on far too many painkillers. But no, it was a really good conversation and I wanted to share it with you at Christmas. I hope you enjoyed it and I'll see you at the end of the show. If any of you are still awake, I hope you are. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
This session is with Phil Craig, the host of the Scandal Mongers, who, if you've not listened before, so I'm sure some of you have, explores the dramatic and controversial side of history. Today he's joined by Sonia Purnell, who some of you may already know, the acclaimed author of Kingmaker, to discuss the life of Pamela Churchill, the political influencer, and power broker who helped shape 20th century diplomacy politics. After their conversation, which has been recorded and going out as a live episode, I believe, it's very exciting. After their discussion, we'll have a chance for you to ask some questions too, so do think of those as they go through. And yeah, as ever, if you've got any questions, let staff members or volunteers know. Last session of the day before the History Rage showdown on the roof terrace. So let us know if you directions up to the roof terrace on the 4th floor after this. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Thank you. Do you want to lock us in?
Oh yeah, I will do. Thank you.
We can't let them escape. There aren't enough of them. Well, thank you for joining me and us. And if anybody's ever seen the podcast, I do tend to do it in front of my Australian-themed bar. So I brought, just to make myself feel at home, I brought my friend Skippy, who is, if we dry out of questions, I'm sure he'll have, what's that, Skip? No, they don't want to hear about your boring bar. Okay, no, they don't. They want to hear about Sonia and her book. And one of the favourite phrases from my history as a podcaster was from a guest, Andrew Lownie, who writes wonderful books about sometimes people that actually knew Pamela Churchill. And I asked her how she described her work, and she said, intellectual smut. So I thought, in no way would I call your book that. But there is some quite naughty bits in it. How did you want to kind of balance the... Because you take a lot of trouble to portray Pamela as a truly important, significant figure in the history of the 20th century, but you also take time to explore the naughtier side of her life. Was that ever a challenge for you, keeping those two things in balance?
Well, I think to understand her, you need to look at both sides. But I think previously, before my book, she was dismissed as a gold-digging courtesan, a stealer of other people's husbands, a flibberty-gibbet, a red-headed tart. Kit Kennedy once called her that stupid fat little butterball. So there were quite a lot of insults flying around about her during her life and after it. But actually, if you got to know Pamela Churchill Harriman better, as Kit Kennedy did, and really became Pamela Churchill's probably closest female friend of all until she died in 1948. It's completely misleading to look at only that one side of her. The fact is, she used the gifts that she had, tremendous as they were, to do what she really wanted to do, which was to make a difference. She was a young woman growing up in the early 20th century who wanted to be in the room. She wanted to be part of the great story of her time. This was considered a bit odd for a young woman, particularly a young woman of no formal education like her. She was the eldest daughter of Lord and Lady Digby, who really were raising her just to get married. And she wanted a different kind of life. And back then, you didn't have many options as a young woman like her. And so she did what she had to do to get into that room.
I mean, before she gets in the room, and I think one of the things I really want to talk about this afternoon is just how very important she was at an absolute turning point in history. A moment that I don't think is even now understood how serious and important it was. By which I mean the Anglo-American relations, 1940, 1941. But before she gets even close to that room, she does have a rather unprepossessing start. Can you just sort of sketch in her childhood, her adolescence, and her year as a failed debutante?
Yes, I mean, you might want to look at a picture of her in the book as a teenager, because she has one of those looks. We've all met teenagers, we've all seen that look on her face that says, "Oh, get me out of here, it's so boring." And she grew up in Dorset. There were horses and ponies and rhododendrons and things. She liked all of those things, but what she really wanted was to be in the big wide world. She really wanted to go to school like her younger brother, who was going to inherit everything and was therefore sent away to Eton to be educated. educated. She was eventually sent to school for a year when she was 15, but really taught nothing much more than domestic science or cooking and sewing, and she had absolutely no intention of doing either. And the other thing that really intrigued her, well, two subjects that really intrigued her at home were politics, as I've said. Her father was a Tory peer, but rarely really went up to Parliament. Would refuse to have politics spoken about at home. He had fought in the First World War. He got very badly injured. The horror of it meant that he just wanted to retreat to the countryside, particularly after the 1918 pandemic, and really not think about this stuff, and particularly not think about that chap Hitler in Berlin. Really could not contemplate the idea that there would be another war, and consequently thought that that man Churchill, who actually once owned their particular bit of Dorset, or his family did, saw him as a rackety political chancellor and just the sort of person that his daughter should have nothing to do with. So, of course, the fact it was taboo meant that Pamela was totally, utterly consumed by it. The other subject that was taboo was her ancestor, her forebear, Jane Digby, who was a very famous 19th century courtesan who ran away from her marriage to run off with a French novelist and a king, and then the king's son, who was another king, and then an Albanian brigand and a Syrian prince, and quite a few others as well, and had a fine old time and wrote about it in intimate detail in a diary. And Pamela's parents were so concerned that their sort of curious, inquisitive, energetic, fizzing a daughter would read this diary, they burnt all the juicy bits, which is perhaps sad for all of us, and leaving only the beginning and the end, and banished her portrait to the back stairs in this kind of aura of disgrace and scandal. So Pamela knew there was exciting stuff out there to do with politics and great world events, and knew that it was an exciting world of sex and drama and adventure and intrigue. All of these things were banned to her, and so of course she really desperately wanted all of them. And then she was sent away. This is sometimes I still can't quite believe it. In 1937, she was sent to, of all places, Munich, to be Finnish. A lot of young girls were sent to Munich at the time. It was considered to be the sort of place where you should be Finnish. Bizarre, isn't it? But unlike
you can learn to ski and meet a lot of Nazis.
And goose step. But unlike the other young aristocratic girls who wanted to party and go out to dinner and things, Pamela was really interested in what was going on. In fact, knew Unity Mitford a little bit and asked Unity if she could meet the Führer, which she did very briefly in the Englischer Garden. This was not something that the other girls were interested in, but Pamela was different. Unfortunately, this meant in 1938, during her season when she was a debutante, she had 12 weeks to hook a husband. This is what she was supposed to have been her whole life until now was leading up to.
And that was it, was it? That was it. 3 months,
yeah.
Husband or on the shelf.
Yeah, yeah. And so Monday to Thursday nights, a ball every night until 4 in the morning. Quite an exhausting existence. Looking pretty, saying nothing of consequence, certainly nothing political, and hoping that you can fill your dance card with invitations. Pamela couldn't. She was one of those poor young women hiding in the loo, hiding from her shame. No one was interested in this odd woman who kept banging on about Hitler, and also couldn't get into a dress with a 17-inch waist. And, you know, total failure, whole season disaster. So the following year, she's on the shelf. Her sister is now coming out. Lead up to war. War begins. She still doesn't have a husband. And her mother says, right, you can come and work for me down in Dorset. She absolutely cannot imagine a worse thing to happen to her.
She's 20 now around?
She's
19.
19. She's 19. The phone rings at a friend's apartment she's thinking of taking on, and is one Randolph Churchill on the other end. She's no idea what he's like, much about him. She's never met him. He invites her out to dinner. It turns out that he's desperate for a wife before he goes off to war. Doesn't much matter who it is. He's asked 8 women in the previous fortnight to marry him. They all said no, quite wisely. Probably they knew him. Pamela doesn't know him. They go out to dinner. He ignores her all the way through until coffee. Finally swings round, looks at her intently and says, and gentlemen do not do this at home, You look healthy enough to bear my son. Will you marry me?
What a charmer.
He's a real charmer, is young Randolph. So it might surprise you to find out that Pamela says yes. Why does she say yes? This is a business transaction. He wants a son, bear the Churchill name. He thinks he's about to go off to war. She wants an exciting life in politics and the military and, high society, anything to get away from Dorset. So, and she sees this as her exit and her entry, if you like, to exit from Dorset, entry into London life at the highest level. Obviously, Churchill's not yet Prime Minister, but he is now First Lord of the Admiralty, and she knows exactly what she's doing. What she doesn't know is what Randolph is like. So she has, in many ways, bitten off more than she can chew, but it's one of those sliding doors moments. This changes her life, and arguably all our lives from then on.
No, it is an amazing story. I mean, she gets closer to the father than the husband. Winston Churchill. She becomes,
not in that way.
No, I don't mean in that way at all. But she becomes a member of his closest circle, closer to him than his own daughters, perhaps his own wife. She becomes a confidant. He enjoys playing cards and bezique with her, drinking with her, talking with her, gossiping with her. And through Churchill, she meets everybody. And she moves into number 10 when Churchill becomes Prime Minister. And then this, as you say, sliding door moment happens. And I think we should just step back a bit and say, and I've written a little bit about this myself, we all assume now that the alliance between Britain and America, Churchill and Roosevelt, was inevitable. It wasn't. In 1939 or 1940, there were so many reasons why America didn't want to support Britain. There were lots of Americans who didn't like the British, say German Americans, Italian Americans, Irish Americans. There were left-wing Americans in the Democratic Party around Roosevelt who hated the British Empire and thought it should be abolished. And some of the journalists that I've read who came to London in 1940 came to write the obituary of an empire with a certain amount of enthusiasm. So how does Churchill set about turning that around?
Okay, so one of the people who understands this pretty much almost as well as Churchill himself is Pamela. And the reason that she does that at this very young age is that he brings her closer and closer and closer in to what he's doing at the same time as he's pushing Randolph away, who he realises is a security liability, cannot keep his mouth shut, behaves obnoxiously, is really, he's really beginning to endanger his father's career, actually, his father's work. But Pamela he sees as someone who's not only completely supportive, but is very intuitive, very interested, absorbs facts, is someone who can sort of sort out spats between perhaps ministers or admirals and things, is always there at the dinner table, is picking up on all sorts of information and understanding it, but also he trusts her completely. So very quickly, she's part of this intimate group called Padlock, which is where pretty much everything is shared with Pamela and Clementine and a couple of others. And so she knows everything. She knows how desperate our plight is and that we are not going to survive without American help, even if they can't be persuaded to come in and fight on our behalf. But she also knows, as Phil has said, that there's all this kind of imperial past that hangs over our relationship. There's a lot of resentment, distrust, mistrust, that is actually stopping us, really, in getting the American support that we need. How on earth can we change American hearts and minds? How can we win them over that we are savable and worth saving? Well, as we know, Roosevelt was not very keen on the British Empire, and he deliberately sends out as his first special envoy to come over to Britain to find out what's going on and are those Brits actually worth saving after all. One, Harry Hopkins, a vehement anti-imperialist, chosen very specifically for this reason. So he comes, Churchill totally goes on the most enormous charm offensive. Clementine is involved in this, but so is Pamela. How is Pamela involved? When the first time that Hopkins comes to Downing Street, they've done all their homework, by the way, they always do. They know that he's a sucker for high-born, glamorous women. Pamela's had her son by now. She looks stunning. The excitement has made her radiant of being part of this extraordinary life. She's slimmed down. Her eyes are like huge blue jewels. There's this charming photograph of her with her baby placed in prime position in the room where Hopkins is taken. Hopkins's first comment virtually is, "What a delicious beauty." He is then introduced to her that weekend at a stately home, Ditchley Park. The candles are burning, the liveried footmen are serving, and Pamela is there looking gorgeous and giving him the full treatment. Although it wasn't quite the full treatment, because as Pamela put it, Harry is a dear, but not a pin-up. So she doesn't go her full operation on Harry, but by the time he goes back, as I'm sure you know, he's a complete convert. Oh my God, he's a Churchill superfan. And when I say Churchill, I don't just mean Winston, I also mean Clementine, and I also mean Pamela, not Randolph, those three. And what does he say to everyone who will listen in Washington, apart from we've got to save those Brits? He also says, the most plugged-in person in Britain after Churchill himself is Pamela. Anyone who goes over there needs to make friends with her. So, the next person that Roosevelt chooses to send over is someone who's not going to fall for this Churchillian charm nonsense, is going to stay aloof and cold. And that's one Averell Harriman, and he's in charge of the Lend-Lease campaign. So actually, terribly important to us. He's going to decide whether or not we're going to get those medicines, those boats, those bits of metal, whatever it is that we need, and when we need them. So he's sent over by Roosevelt. He's aloof, he's cold-hearted, he's a playboy, he's rich, but, you know, he really isn't someone that's going to fall for all that charm.
He's about 50, isn't he? 40,
yeah.
47 or something. Yeah. She's still only, what, 21?
She's 20.
20.
Just coming up to her 21st birthday. So he's sent over. She's done her homework. She knows, though, that he may appear like this, but his childhood, he had a harsh disciplinarian father. No one laughs at his jokes. He's a bit of a plodder. He's a bit of a wallflower at his own parties. He's socially really insecure. So she knows all that, as does Beaverbrook, as does Churchill. A dinner party is organised at the Dorchester. At this point, Pamela knows what it is that she can best do for her country, and that is help bring those Americans round. So her job is very specific at this dinner party, and she has a very specific war uniform which she wears, bought by Beaverbrook. That war uniform was a skin-tight, shoulderless gold lame number that made her look an absolute $1 million. The seating plan is organised. She sits down next to Averell, who's just arrived from Washington, and she goes into what they came to call her mating dance. It started by stroking his forearm, looking into his eyes with those big sapphire eyes, laughing at every attempt at repartee. No one's ever done that before. She's a Churchill. She looks gorgeous. He's been told she's the most plugged-in person in Britain. It's also glamorous and exciting. And then a raid happens. They open the curtains after turning the lights off. They see Selfridge's department store on fire. Averell says, let's go down to my lower floor suite so we can talk easier. They go down. It's fair to say that I think by the morning he's firmly enlisted to the British cause. And as he says sometime later, there's nothing like the Blitz to get something going. And as she explained a long time later, that was a very fortuitous raid. So from now on, he's totally smitten by her, by the Churchills. She feeds him bits of information that help him make decisions as to what to recommend to the President to send over and Lend-Lease. Those decisions are absolutely vital to our survival. And if you look at Jock Colville's diaries, you'll notice him saying, Averell Harriman completely got what we needed and why we needed it and when we needed it. He deserved all the golden plaudits that he got for that reason. People go on, they're surprised at how willing and able he is to make these things happen. Perhaps they really don't quite understand what Pamela is doing. And the other thing that she's doing, which is almost as important, is, and he finds it very flattering, he doesn't quite realise what's going on because she's very subtle about it, she asks him questions. So what's the thinking in Washington about this? And you must know the President so well. What does he think about this? And what is Congress doing? And he's so flattered and delighted to be able to talk about this stuff. And it all goes back to Beaverbrook and then quite soon to Churchill himself directly over games of Bezique, where she's able to tell him everything that she's picking up.
So what does Churchill feel about the fact that his daughter-in-law is having this quite open affair with another man? Is he pleased about it? Does he knowingly move her around the chessboard, or does he just pretend not to know?
He doesn't talk about it publicly. Obviously, that would cause a scandal, but he is also delighted about it. And in terms of his son's marriage, it's pretty clear to both him and Clementine, really from the off, that marriage has no chance whatsoever of lasting. He sees how his son behaves. The night that she gives birth in a huge air raid at Chequers, he's in bed with another woman. Mm-hmm. He's drunken. He leaves top secret papers in his unlocked car. He gets into brawls. He's just an absolute pain in the arse, frankly. And so, as someone once put it, and I think this sums it up very well, one of his private secretaries, Churchill loves his family, but his purposes always come first.
Well, it was an interesting time. When I did a book on 1940, this is 20-odd years ago, I interviewed a war reporter whose father owned a very influential newspaper. And he was brought to meet, American, he was brought to meet with Churchill and introduced to Mary Churchill. And Churchill himself suggested that Mary and he might like to go on a date. I interviewed Mary, who was still alive at the time, and she remembered it very well, but she said she didn't want to go on a date. I think she was like 17 or something.
Right.
But he was quite willing, Churchill, to try to get the Americans on side.
Listen, Averil Harriman was deliberately invited to Chequers or Ditchley the same weekends as Pamela. They expedited it. It was a honey trap. Randolph eventually comes to realise what's going on. He never forgives his parents, ever, for the rest of his life, for, as he saw it, privileging the national interest above his. But it became totally clear, as he saw, that they were facilitating this because it was of national importance.
OK, you say that, and I'm sure you're right, that she never slept with Harry Hopkins. I, however, found something quite interesting. About 20 years ago, I was writing about 1942, and I went into Hyde Park in New York, and I got into boxes and boxes of Hopkins papers. I don't think some of these have been looked at for a long time. And I found these exquisite little cards. You know, people used to write little cards. And one of them was, well, first of all, there was a message from the Savoy Hotel saying, Mrs. Churchill requires you to call her when you arrive. And then a few days later, I think it was just 42 or 43, this very enigmatic note from Pamela to him saying, I'm sorry I didn't see you on your visit. I hope you had fun chasing the girls up and down the corridors of the Savoy. As you know, some of us quite like being caught. And because I wasn't really writing about that, I just put it back in the book. So I didn't even put it in my book.
I think I can...
It's flirty, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
But I think what that was about was that eventually Harriman's wife, he has a wife back in the US, gets to hear about it. Because when Randolph hears about it, he starts going around London complaining about it. Word gets back to America. Averil's wife threatens to go public with it. Both Hopkins and Roosevelt are worried about the scandal that might involve and what that might do to the Anglo-American alliance. And so what they do is, much to Averil's dismay, is without him, agreeing to it, is just done, fait accompli. You are going to be the American ambassador in Moscow, a very long way away, because this has got to stop now. It's gone from being quite useful to being actually potentially dangerous. So I suspect that could be Pamela acknowledging the fact that she was caught. Actually, she was doing the chasing. I venture that Averil was caught, not the other way around. But in a way, though, it was quite useful because this left the door open, although she hadn't just been sleeping with him, but it left the door open for her really to go on to expand her special operation, her Operation Seduction USA, to, just for instance, Ed Murrow, very useful, had, great following in America, so whatever he said was useful, so she would feed him little tips.
For those who don't know, probably the most important broadcaster, broadcasts live from the Blitz, another left-wing American, no friend of the British, who becomes completely persuaded that we are the plucky underdogs against fascism.
Utterly in love with Pamela. I mean, passionately, also married, but passionately in love with her. And his boss, the head of CBS, Bill Paley, she seduced him too, just to sort of, dot the I's and cross the T's. And now CBS became utterly pro-British. And then near a D-Day, she started sleeping with the head of the bombing campaign in the US Air Force, Major General Fred Anderson. He needed to be brought on side because there was a bit of dispute between the Americans and the British over bombing techniques. And so she had to really try and help negotiate a compromise, and to do that she also slept with the head of the RAF. And so this sort of pillow talk was really actually at a high level. And because we're here, I should just tell you that the Americans had this idea, which you can understand, that the bombing should take place during the day because you have fewer civilian casualties on the ground, because obviously you could make it more accurate with the current technology. But it was more dangerous for aircrew. They hadn't lost as many as we had by that point, obviously. We thought the other way because we'd lost so many that we should bomb at night because that protected aircrew. And we're going to have to take the civilian casualties. So she was really sent to talk to both sides. How are we going to go forward? We've got to find a way forward. So that was the sort of thing that she got involved in. She also slept with Jock Whitney. He was involved in American intelligence, etc., etc. She ran a club called the Churchill Club, where she would choose which general or official or admiral or whoever she was going to take home with her that night, whoever would be the most useful. So this probably sounds really dark to you, and in a way it is dark, but she was willing to do it, and it had a very specific, very patriotic purpose. And there are American professors of diplomacy now who talk about this strategic sex life as really helping to create and elevate and sustain what we now call, or did call, maybe we don't anymore, the special relationship. Because as we came in on this, that didn't exist. There were no real back channels before. This was all kind of new. But the other thing that we should remember is even at the end of the war, and she'd been doing this for several years by then, she was only 25 when the war came to an end.
Extraordinary.
And she didn't mess it up.
Of all these men, was there any one or two that she had really deep feelings for, or was it all quite, as you say, transactional?
I think the two, I think she was genuinely fond of all of them. I think she was a bit scared of Bill Paley, actually. He was very tough now. But I think she was genuinely fond of all of them. I think Ed Murrow and Averil Harriman were her favourites. The only one, interestingly, who got very jealous and almost let his jealousy get out of control over this was Ed Murrow, who found it very difficult that once when Pamela was ill, he arrived at her apartment in Grosvenor Square with a Hershey bar to cheer her up, but the lift wouldn't come down. She was right up in the attic. So he had to go up 6 flights of stairs. When she got to the top and saw why the lift wouldn't come down is because Major General Fred Anderson had sent a huge carton of prime juicy steaks, which you could just fly over from America. The Air Force had access to all kinds of things, even ice cream. And that was being delivered to her from him as a way of getting her to feel better. Ed Murrow felt completely outclassed, and I think it's fair to say had a bit of a meltdown about it. Yeah.
So the war ends, she's 25, 26. It slightly reminds you of that famous play Plenty, where, nothing ever quite compares. And yet perhaps in her life things do compare, because she manages to stay as a player, especially in American politics, or initially she's also in Europe. How does she manage that transition and still stay relevant?
Well, jumping over, because I haven't got time to talk about her sort of years in Europe where she, just very briefly, we should talk about Gianni Agnelli, I think, who was the love of her life, who was the scion to the Agnelli family and therefore Fiat, had been on the wrong side of the war.
Oh, the Fiat car empire, yeah.
Wrong side of the war, had to rehabilitate himself, but saw Fiat as a bulwark against communism, because considered quite likely that Italy would go red after the war. It was in ruins, the economy was in ruins, considered a real threat. And she managed to persuade Churchill to meet that ghastly car mechanic, as he called Agnelli, didn't want to meet any Italians. She managed to convince the Western statesmen that she knew that actually Italy was a key place where, instead of confiscating Fiat as they were going to do, they should help him build Fiat up again. And she tutored Agnelli. He was her first post-war project, if you like, in how to behave with statesmen. He had no idea. He was the same age as her, without her kind of grounding.
So she was an early sort of
politics.
image consultant, or
Totally.
whatever you'd call it,
Absolutely.
spin doctor.
And to the point where later on people like Henry Kissinger would say, oh, he knows how to operate as a statesman. A lot of that is down to her. And the people around Agnelli have absolutely said she was key in that. Anyway, they didn't get married. There were all sorts of reasons for that, although he called her every single day for the rest of her life. And she ends up in America as the wife.
What is she getting out of this relationship? He's getting his place in the Italian, ruling class reinforced, I suppose you could say.
Well, it's sort of international.
Does she get gifts, toys?
She gets a very nice apartment in Paris, a custom-made Bentley, a butler, sort of free passes at all the couture houses in Paris. But most importantly, she feels useful. I think she loved money. She loved frocks, she loved jewels, she loved private planes. What she most loved, though, was power.
Power.
Yeah. And she recognised that one often led to the other, and it was difficult to get one without the other. So I think, when people say, all she wanted was money, she loved money, true, but she loved power much more, definitely. And she was really kind of observant of the fact that she saw that power had shifted from Britain now and was in America. Post-war, America was the superpower, obviously, with the USSR. She was terrified that there was going to be a Third World War. That was always something that horrified her. She lived in London all through the Blitz. She had quite a few narrow escapes. But she goes over to America. She marries a Broadway producer, the man who brought us all The Sound of Music. He commissioned it. But after that, he was a complete flop. And she tried to sort of help his career, but she's still not in politics. He dies. She goes to a party in Washington, D.C., in the house of one K. Graham, who...
publisher of the Washington Post.
Absolutely, during the Watergate era. And guess who's in the garden? It's Avril. His wife has just died. They meet each other. Do you remember when? And Stalin did this and Churchill did that. And do you remember when de Gaulle had that meltdown or whatever it was? They talked all night. They met up again. Within a few months, they're married. Now, this is how, another sliding doors moment, she is able to get into American politics at last. He's an elder statesman in the Democratic Party, not a very good politician as it happens. He's more of a sort of, he's good at negotiating, but he just doesn't understand how to play the game. But he knows everyone. And so she thinks, okay, this is my way into it. And then the 1980 landslide happens. The Republicans, Ronald Reagan win by a vast landslide. The Democrats were in total kind of despair, a bit like now, thinking, are we ever going to get back? And she, just to sort of say it very, very briefly, really, she shows them the way. She really coaches them. She doesn't just help them fundraise. She gets together policy ideas, way forward, how do we campaign? But most of all, she spots someone in 1980, a young man written off by pretty much everyone else, doesn't even trust himself anymore, very messy private life, but has this ability to communicate. He's got rough edges, no one really knows him, no one in Washington knows him, but she sees something in him, and she works with him over the next 12 years.
And that man is?
Clinton.
Bill Clinton. Was she in love with him as well, a little bit?
No, but they flirted.
Because now she's, 50? He's, 40?
So, no, he's a lot younger than her. So in 1980, she's 60.
Oh, she's 60 now.
Yeah.
Of course she is.
So by the time he's elected, she's 72. And he's 20-odd years younger than her. She gets very cross with him when he brings another woman to her house one night, gets really, really cross, you might think a bit hypocritically, but she so wants him to win. And as we know, and she's very instrumental in that campaign, that 92 campaign, the Republicans had a 90% approval rating after the Gulf War. Everyone thought they weren't going to win again. But she said, well, Churchill lost in 45. He was the victor in war, but he lost at the ballot box because he kept on going on about war. What people wanted to hear about was houses and health and schooling and that real everyday life. That's what we need to do now. And so that campaign, as I'm sure you remember, became It's the Economist.
Oh, that was her.
Very much.
How interesting.
Shaped that.
That's so interesting.
So, as we know, he won.
Was she friendly with Hillary, by the way, as well?
Yes. Now, a lot of people have asked about that. And I asked Clinton himself and I asked Hillary's chief of staff, because there were so many rumours that they were like this. They weren't bosom buddies, but they liked each other, respected each other, and got on very well. And Pamela recognised Hillary's importance in all of this, but also Hillary recognised Pamela's importance. And so if you look on, if you can on YouTube, if you look at Clinton's eulogy for her at her funeral, he makes a specific point by saying repeatedly, Hillary and I, because people had kept on saying that they fought like cats and dogs. But one of the things that I found in her papers was a private letter from him just after the election victory, but before inauguration, in which he says to Pamela, I would never have been ready to stand before the world or America as president without you. So he completely acknowledges
That's
her
extraordinary. Just to stand back and think of somebody who hasn't got an O level to her name and is now essentially kind of shaping 20 years of American governance, a country she wasn't even born in.
No.
I mean, that is some achievement.
It is. And part of it is she teaches him what she learnt back in Downing Street in the 1940s by Churchill's side. So Clinton, I mean, I spoke to him about this. He said, yeah, I used to say, so what did Churchill do there? And was that, did that work or did that work? And what went wrong and why? And what did he get right and why? And so he was fascinated by that. But she'd picked up a lot of other kind of intelligence by this point, and she was able to guide him. And in that eulogy that he made at her funeral, by the way, presidents don't normally give eulogies at funerals for someone like that. And she also had the vice president too, so she had the full kind of Monty. He says in that speech, and watch it, I am here today in no small part because of her. So he is saying publicly, she got me into the White House. And that's what he said to me privately. Yep.
Wow. So as a kind of reward for this, or maybe it wasn't just for this, she's given perhaps the best diplomatic job in the world.
Yep. He appoints her the American ambassador to France. She wasn't sent here. That was an idea at one point, but everyone thought then the tabloids will crucify her. We can't send her to Britain. So she was sent to France, where I think it was Parry Much said that she has made the scandal of her past into an ornament, which I think is such a sort of French thing to say.
Lovely.
I think any British paper would say that. She's terrified because this is a big job. It's her first formal job at the age of 73. Think about that if you're thinking about another career. And she has to prove that she can do it on her own. She has no spouse. Averill's long since dead. Often ambassadors in these big embassies can't do it on their own without a spouse. It's really, really hard. But she does. She really throws herself into it. And the big, big issue of the day is Bosnia. And what is extraordinary is that Chirac, who was then the French president, calls her personally, invites her personally to the Élysée Palace. This doesn't happen to ambassadors. I talked to the British ambassador at the time about this, and he said, well, that wasn't something that ever happened to the rest of us. It was amazing. And Chirac said, look, we can't let Bosnia go on. We keep failing to find a way forward. You're different because I know if you call the White House, Bill would pick up. So I know that you can be this transatlantic conduit like nothing and no one else. And indeed, that's what happened. And indeed, she helped with the Brits as well, obviously, the French and the Americans, typically quite suspicious of each other, very different culturally, start to work on this. And after yet another outrage, She is able to, with her great friend Richard Holbrook, who's the chief negotiator and a great fan of hers, negotiate something, an alliance that is going to actually finally bring the Serbs to the negotiating table, Operation Deliberate Force. And that was, imperfectly, of course, the end of that awful, bloody war. I asked Clinton, all the details are in the book as to what she did and the very clever way she weaponised her fame to help bring us apart. I asked Clinton, so how big was she? How important was she in bringing peace to Bosnia? And he said, this is probably the biggest achievement of his administration, by the way, at least overseas. She was a major part of it. Now, Chirac isn't with us anymore, but his chief foreign affairs advisor, Jean-David Levitt, is. So I asked him, how important was Pamela to finding a way through that? He said, her role was invisible, hence the fact that no one knew about this before, but decisive.
Wow.
And yet, when she died not long after, one of the things that was repeatedly written about her, and which I was trying to kind of find out whether it was true or totally unfair, was, and I quote, she was expert only in rich men's ceilings.
Not fair.
No.
Not fair at all. No, you do us so much justice in this book, and you don't avoid the salacious stuff, because A, it's fun to read, but B, it's an important part of her life. And she probably would have made the same kind of gags herself.
Well, let me just tell you about that, actually, Bosnia thing. So one of the problems they had was Izetbegovic, who was the president of Bosnia, was totally fed up with the Allies, the West. We kept on breaking our promises. We never turned up. It was just too much. And he was in Paris for what seemed like yet another useless talking shop. And he was about to get on a plane and go home. And that would have been very difficult because they were waiting to get the final green light from the White House for this bombing campaign. It would be so much better if Izetbegovic could be there. But no one could persuade him. Leave it to me, says Pamela. So she sends her staff out into the Paris night to track him down. He's found in a light rain shower, summer evening, in a park near the Champs-Élysées. Her staff said, will you come and have dinner with Her Excellency, the ambassador? He, understandably says, well, it's a bit late. It was about 11 o'clock in the evening by now. We'll just come for a drink with Mrs. Harriman then. And as he said in an interview I found a few years later, I couldn't refuse. This legend, this great woman I'd heard so much about. How could I refuse to go to her embassy? So he gets in a car, which they send for him. It arrives at the embassy in this beautiful courtyard of the residence there. And she's standing, someone's got word to her, so she's ready. She's standing at the top of the steps in the courtyard wearing red Courrèges silk dress. She's looking absolutely gorgeous. He comes in, still the green light hasn't come from the White House, so they can't tell him exactly what's going to happen. So she has to keep him going and happy while they're waiting. And finally the call comes in, and there's a French journalist who doesn't know what's going on, but sees her lead Izetbegovic up to a sitting room on the first floor where they're going to watch the bombing campaign from a green sofa there. And he sees this man who's been through so much, following this famous woman, almost meekly, like a lamb, says this French journalist, up the stairs.
Wow.
She had this power, and she knew when to weaponize it.
What a scene for a movie.
Yeah, great scene.
Yeah. Has it been optioned for a film?
Yes.
Oh, well, it would be an amazing film. Oh, my goodness. It really would.
Keep your fingers crossed.
No, I will. I mean, it's naturally cinematic, man. And what a story arc. My goodness. No, you've done us such justice, and it's a really brilliant read. I loved reading it, actually. And sometimes it's just so nice to see a very famous set of events. For example, what happens in London in 1940 from a totally different perspective. And you realise there was so much more going on than you realised. Anybody here in this small but select gathering would like to ask some questions?
Well, I wanted to know really, how do you think we should remember her?
Gosh, what a fantastic question. I think as someone who used her gifts and her chances as well as she could, who made the best of what she had, ultimately to do great things. I would argue because she was so close to power in Downing Street in the 1940s, and again in the White House in the 1990s, and many other places in between. We haven't even talked about what she did during the Cold War, going to Moscow, seeing Andropov, all these other things, advising Mandela, so many things that she did. When Biden pulled out the 88 presidential race because he was accused of plagiarizing, she was the one who wrote to him and said, keep going, you will one day eventually get there. And he wrote back saying, I will never forget your friendship. I mean, all the way through all of this, I don't think there is anyone, and if anyone knows someone, please tell me, who was that close to power in 3 different countries, as I'm including France here, in 2 continents, over 50 years. I think she was a one-off.
Well. Anybody else?
I'm on chapter 40, like at the beginning of the financial troubles that she inherited again with the second husband.
Yeah.
And so her energy, I think, really put well in your book. Just her, that's all that she did, like you said, over 50 years in her life. And I think with women, it's this, Madonna or whore kind of thing that we still haven't moved past. But yeah, thank you for the books. I think it elevates, beyond the stereotypes, what her role was.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I spoke to Lord Michael Jay, who was the American and the British residences in Paris are literally on either side of a wall, so you could pass a bag of sugar over or whatever if you needed to. So he got to know her pretty well, and he saw how much she did, how lonely she was in that huge residence by herself, but also how hard she worked. And he told me that before he got to Paris, people talk, oh, she's a flibbity gibbet, she doesn't really amount to anything, and, all the rest of it. And he told me that when he arrived and he wanted to be open-minded about it, and immediately he was blown away by how professional she was, her access to Chirac, her access to Clinton, and the clever way that she used that. She didn't overuse it, but she used it when she needed to, and therefore that made a difference. And he could see her operate really spectacularly well. And I think that just sometimes I get quite depressed that she wasn't a saint. She could be selfish and ruthless and all of those things, certainly. I'm sure you could argue she was a pretty useless mother, and I think she would probably agree. But I would say that on the balance sheet of life, what she did us all here a great favour indeed, not only back in the 40s and, in the Second World War, but again in Bosnia. Because one of the things that she did, and Christian Amanpour, who was the sort of famous war reporter for CNN in those days, who became very close to her. I spoke to her for a long time about it, and she said, the thing is that what Pamela did was she was the conscience of the Western leaders, because she was the only one who'd lived through the Blitz and knew what it was like. And her whole life was about trying to prevent that, or at least limit that happening again. And that's why she was constantly trying to get Clinton to step up and do something, and why she saw it as very much her duty in the end to get Clinton and Chirac working on the same page. And so even before Chirac was appointed president, or was elected president in France, she had introduced him because she thought Chirac could be someone that America could work with. So she was really quite strategic, really did make a big difference in life. And I think I'd really like her to be remembered that way. Okay, loads of faults. We all have faults, don't we? She had plenty. But I think she really did a good job for us. And I guess my job was kind of to tell that story. It hadn't been told before. Her papers had never been available before. Clinton had never spoken about her before. Many of the people in the 92 campaign had never spoken before. But really quite extraordinary. Hopefully you now agree, having got that far in the book.
Well, she really couldn't. She couldn't have wished to have a better advocate for her. The book's remarkable. And thank you for sharing it with us here today. And thank you all for joining in. Thanks for coming. I hope you found that interesting. It's a really, really, I could talk to her for another hour, to be honest. There's so much in the book and in her knowledge of Pamela that's worth you knowing, and it will be a great thing to borrow from your local library, or maybe go and buy a copy. I always love to see in the comments of the shows people saying, "Oh, I've gone and bought this book," or they say, "Oh, Phil, that's another book I'm going to have to buy." To which I always say, "Well, don't forget to buy mine. 1945 The Reckoning, still on sale, paperback coming out next year." Anyway, that's me done for the year. I will be back probably mid to late January. I'm not frankly sure, but I've got some interesting stories, a few unusual ones. I may have mentioned last week, I'm going to do bird watching, which is a surprisingly interesting world with its own politics and very much its own scandals. And it's something I've kind of got into. I joined the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, this year, because on our various holidays that we do in Britain or Ireland, there's some wonderful places you can go, and it's a lovely way to see nature. So I joined that gang. And my friend Stephen Moss is one of Britain's leading birders, and he's going to come talk to me, and he's very entertaining, so that'll be fun. Lots of other things coming up next year, but for the moment, once again, thank you for your company throughout this year. Exciting year. I'm in a good year. There's obviously every year there are troubles. I have a back issue, but it's actually very satisfying with the book and the podcast and my friends and the people I meet on here and the people who listen and comment and take part. And if you're one of them, and you obviously are, if you're still here at the end of this show, thank you so much for all your company and your support. Have a very, very, very happy Christmas and Happy New Year. See you next year. This has been a Podcast World production. If you want to contact me, write to team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandalmongers in the heading, or you can reach out via the social media links in the show's bio. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, please consider taking a few seconds to hit the donate button found just below this video. Many thanks, and see you next week.